Welcome to the West Block on this Sunday, February the 24th. From the nation's capital, I'm Tom Clark. Coming up on today's show, this could be a make or break weekend for the Keystone Pipeline. We'll speak with Alberta Premier Alison Redford, who's in Washington, D.C. Our journalist panel weighs in on the curious case of Senator Mike Duffy and the coming American financial crisis with the strange name. How could sequestration upset the lives of millions of Canadians? But first, the ripple effect from pipeline politics is starting to spread, affecting a range of issues from the price that Alberta can charge for its oil to political calculations inside the White House. Alberta Premier Alison Redford is in Washington this weekend for some critical meetings and with sale pitches for the pipeline. She joins me now. Premier, good to have you on the show again. You were down there in Washington at the time that the governors are meeting, so you're sort of around the edges of that meeting. What are you hearing from them specifically about the pipeline?
Well, what's really interesting is there are different governors that have different reasons for wanting Keystone to be approved. Some are around energy security and some are around jobs. There's a lot of governors on both sides of the aisles, both Republican and Democrat, that are understanding what Alberta's environmental record has been, which is a very strong and bold record in terms of legislating on targets, having a price on carbon, investing in technology, things like carbon capture and storage. So we want to be here because there are so many people having this conversation that if we weren't, we think there'd be a bit of a gap. And so we're glad to be here. I've met with about maybe 20 governors over the last 36 hours and really good support on this issue.
Do you get the sense, though, Premier, that the discussion in Washington or in the political class in the United States now about Keystone is less about energy security, is less about jobs, and more about the environment than it ever was?
Well, I'm not sure if I would say that it's very much around environmental issues, but from my perspective, since I became Premier 18 months ago, we've always expected and known that that's what the conversation was about. You know, we want Keystone to go ahead, but a lot of what we're doing down here is working with Ambassador Dewar, with our representatives, to make sure that people know what Canada's story is and what Alberta's story is in terms of really responsible energy development. And so from our perspective, we've always thought that those two issues were very closely tied. Our sense always has been that if you talk to governors in particular, that those arguments with respect to the economy and energy security were arguments that were given, basically, that people understood the importance of not only the jobs in terms of building the pipeline, but even the manufacturing. One of the other discussions that's interesting is the number of states that have economic development that's connected to supplying the oil sands. So it's not only about the pipeline that's being built, but it's about the fact that there are companies that are developing in the oil sands that are very large customers of manufacturers in the United States.
You know, it's interesting, though, looking at that discussion from afar, you know, all the arguments are being made, and reasonably so, about energy security and jobs, especially for the American economy. But the political decision doesn't seem to be revolving around that. You've said just now that, of course, Alberta does have a carbon tax, $15 a ton. That's the price you put on it. You're quite proud of it in Alberta. Do you think that your cause would be helped if there was a national carbon tax, cap and trade or straight up tax?
Well, you know, it depends on the economy in each province. You know, we have different economies in different provinces. You know, we think that the fact that we have the legislation that we do is quite impactful in terms of climate change and environmental policy in Alberta. I'm not sure it would have quite the same impact in a place like Manitoba. So I think it is important to look from province to province in terms of what's most effective. And that basket of tools that we have in place is probably the most important thing that we can talk about with the administration and cabinet and decision makers in the United States.
I guess what I'm wondering, though, is that while it may be province by province, in terms of what you need, the tool that you need right now to push ahead the Keystone, if Canada nationally had a carbon tax or a price on carbon, do you think that that would move the political sticks up the field at all?
Well, my sense is that that people who are involved in this discussion in the United States really do understand that we have different jurisdictions in Canada. You know, they're very focused on Alberta for certain things and other provinces for other things. You know, what they want to see, ironically, and I always talk about this, of course, is an energy strategy in Canada, where we're able to say as Canadians that we understand that we are an energy superpower, that we have the ability to market around the world, and that we have a coherent policy with respect to everything from, you know, energy efficiency to monitoring, to carbon tax where necessary, to integrated land use management, and what our record has been. And I think that is probably more important in terms of where we have to be as Canadians right now.
Okay, I don't mean to harp on this, but I'm not sure that I'm hearing an answer from you. National carbon tax, you don't think, am I interpreting this correctly? You don't think that a Canadian national carbon tax would help the Keystone at all in any way?
Well, my sense from what I'm hearing in the United States is that they want to know what our record has been, but I haven't heard from decision makers down here that if we were to implement something like that, that would somehow shift the dial on those issues. You know, I think that we still have some discussions in Canada that we have to have about that. So from my perspective, just really pragmatically, it's not something that I'm hearing down here in terms of questions that are being asked. You've got a good political nose, if I can say that. And I'm wondering, you know, I know you're down there as the salesperson. How tough a deal is this going to be when, you know, you take into account what the president had to say in the State of the Union address, how that was interpreted by the American ambassador here, saying that this is a direct challenge to Canada. You seem to be saying, well, it's more regional than it is national. How tough is this sale going to be, the Keystone Pipeline? Well, it's always been challenging, and we've been working very hard on this for the past year and a half and taking time to understand that people in the United States want to have this conversation. But what I would say is that what we heard in the State of the Union address, what we heard from Ambassador Jacobson, even Secretary Kerry's speech last week, is not different than what we've been already engaged in terms of discussion. So I know that from a Canadian perspective, for people that heard those speeches, that they think that this is somehow signaling a significant change. From our perspective, we've always taken this issue quite seriously. We've understood that the U.S. administration in the past 2 years has taken this quite seriously. And so that's the level that we've already been engaged in, and that's what we'll continue to be part of. Premier Alison Redford speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Premier, thanks very much for being here. Always good to have you on the show. Have a good Sunday, Tom. Thank you. Well, coming up on the West Block, Senator Duffy pays back his housing allowance. End of story? Our journalist panel weighs in on that. Stay tuned.